Joining us now, Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. He's a member of the Armed Services, Homeland Security, and Judiciary Committees. And I'd like to start there, if I could, Senator, given that you are on the Homeland Security Committee, given that the initial reports show that the shooter seemed to be targeting the administration, given the fact that we are at war right now, from a Homeland Security perspective, any concerns about how this all played out? I mean, given the fact that the Secret Service did their job and they were able to stop the gunman, but bigger picture, we had so many members of the top tier of our administration in this hotel.
No question that the Secret Service and law enforcement performed with skill and courage and averted a real mass tragedy. And let's be very clear, violence has no place in our politics, no place in America. But we need to evaluate the choices of venues and sites, the use of perimeters to try to stop this kind of killer. Let's be clear about what he wanted to do. And the threat level has never been greater, more complex and dangerous than it is right now. So we need to rethink and reevaluate the concept of security when it comes to these mass events.
Yeah, although we should be clear, the gunman got nowhere near President Trump, and in some ways security did work, although there are certainly questions about that venue. But we wanted to ask a quick talking point that emerged among Republicans this weekend was that, well, because the Department of Homeland Security is not funded right now, that therefore events like this are that much more at risk. Can you talk about that?
The Department of Homeland Security is funded. We provided funds for it in the Senate by a unanimous vote twice. The House is in a kind of political meltdown, but the agencies responsible for security have the funds they need to do their job. What hasn't been funded formally, and it won't be until there are real reforms in ICE or CBP, is those agencies that have brutalized violently people in Minneapolis, but all across the country, and been lawless and reckless in the way that they have treated American citizens, not just immigrants. And so we need to be very clear that DHS won't be funded longer term, but they do have the resources they need right now.
All right, well, let's turn to the situation in Iran. We've been talking this morning. You know, there were some thoughts about negotiations could have happened in Islamabad in recent days, but Iran withdrew its foreign minister before a U.S. delegation could even get there. So the president then claimed that he was the one canceling it. We know that's not to be the case. But there does seem to be a new proposal being put forth that would separate the Strait of Hormuz with the future of Iran's nuclear program. Do you think that would be the right way for the U.S. to approach this?
Very much so. I think there needs to be a phased approach here to seeking diplomacy. Obviously, the contradictory and shifting objectives that have been so confused. The president has started a war of choice. Really, it's a war of impulse and whim and illusion. And now there is a path forward, which is for each side to suspend its blockade, which would be confidence building. Also very important to the world economy as well as ours. I wouldn't be surprised to see oil prices climb by another $1 in the next few weeks, which will be devastating to many parts of our economy. So I think there is a path forward here. But make no mistake, diplomacy is going to be tough. We know it from the JCPOA negotiations. And to stop a nuclear-armed Iran, which has to be done, will take some very tough negotiating. As a first step, suspending or lifting the blockades on each side makes sense.
Senator, before we get to the diplomacy aspect, there's the daily aspect of at least 10,000 troops having been shipped to the area. There are 3 carrier groups sitting in the area. Do we have any idea of the cost to the American taxpayer for this babysitting operation over there right now?
That's a key question, and the answer is no. We have no accurate or clear idea as to what the cost is militarily. Obviously, there's a strategic cost, as Richard Haas just said so well, But dollars and cents, I think we've been lowballed by the administration, but mainly stonewalled and stymied in trying to get to the cost. I've asked in classified setting, I'll be very honest, for numbers, and so far we've received none. And I think my Republican colleagues are becoming as frustrated and exasperated and angry as I am about the failure to provide that kind of information.
Chris Matthews, jump in next.
Senator, let's look at how this war started. If you look at the New York Times coverage, which has not really been challenged, it's about an hour-long meeting with Bibi Netanyahu sitting in the Situation Room with Donald Trump and making the case, a number of cases, but one of the cases was, we will overthrow that regime if we act now. If we attack now alongside Israel, we will overthrow that regime. That hasn't happened. That is a reality. We are still stuck with that same regime. Now, that condition, which was going to mean we wouldn't have to worry about the Strait of Hormuz, isn't there. So we're going back to where we started. In other words, this war will be, the goal of this war will be to get the Strait open, and it already was open before we went to war. So what have we accomplished?
Well, we've accomplished nothing so far except weakening Iran in conventional military strength. We've destroyed a lot of their missiles and drones and probably their production capacity, but by no means eliminated or obliterated it. But what we have failed to do is accomplish any of those shifting contradictory objectives, whether it's regime change or securing the enriched uranium or even stopping Iran's proxies like Hezbollah and the Houthis, which still have capacity. The point here is that this war was begun with very false assumptions that regime change could be accomplished as quickly as seizing Maduro in Venezuela. And if anything, the regime has been hardened in its intentions and its resistance to eliminating its nuclear arsenal, and hardened in its determination to hold the world hostage, in effect, economically. So I think we have to recognize that escalation, bombing, 30,000 feet, war is not going to accomplish any of those objectives. Diplomacy, a path forward through suspending the blockades on each side, provides a confidence-building and also economically advantageous path forward.
All right, Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, thank you very much
Thank you, Senator,
for coming on the show this morning. We appreciate it.